When people ask me if a covert narcissist can stay hidden forever, my answer is both simple and complicated. Covert narcissism, unlike the more obvious grandiose type, often thrives in subtlety. It doesn't always come wrapped in loud arrogance or overt entitlement. It may instead come cloaked in quiet victimhood, chronic resentment, or a low-grade bitterness that hides in plain sight. And because of that, it can feel invisible for a long time. The covert narcissist often plays a game of smoke and mirrors. They may look like the kind, humble, long-suffering partner, the misunderstood employee, the thoughtful friend. They may present as sensitive, even self-deprecating, and that's what makes them so hard to spot. Unlike the brash narcissist who tells you they're smarter than everyone else, the covert will sigh, roll their eyes, subtly undermine, or cast themselves as the unappreciated one. It's not obvious. It's insidious. But here's the thing, human behavior always leaves breadcrumbs. You may not recognize them at first, but patterns don't lie. Over time, you'll notice the chronic victimhood, the way every story casts them as the injured party. You'll notice the passive aggression, the backhanded comments that land like paper cuts, small enough to ignore at first, but painful when they accumulate. You'll notice the way your joy is often met with envy, or your pain is met with dismissal. Covert narcissism hides, yes, but it leaks. Can they stay hidden forever? In the true sense, no. Maybe they can keep some people fooled for a lifetime, especially those who are conflict avoidant or deeply empathetic. But what can't stay hidden is the toll their behavior takes on others. You feel it in your nervous system. You feel it in the self-doubt that creeps in after another guilt trip. You feel it in the loneliness that grows from never being truly seen or heard in that relationship. Even if they keep the mask on, the impact of that mask is undeniable. And that's where your power lies. You may not be able to control whether they reveal themselves, but you can always trust your own body's wisdom. You can pay attention to the fatigue, the confusion, the constant questioning of yourself. Those are not random feelings. Those are data points. That's your intuition alerting you to the fact that something is off, even if it's hard to name. The covert narcissist thrives in the shadows because doubt is their ally. They rely on you questioning yourself, rationalizing their behavior, excusing their moods. They depend on you telling yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I'm too sensitive. That's the perfect camouflage for them. The antidote is clarity. The antidote is calling a thing what it is, even if only quietly to yourself at first. And let's be real. It takes courage, because with covert narcissism, you often don't get the dramatic blowouts or the obvious betrayals that make leaving or setting boundaries feel justified. Instead, you get years of erosion, death by 1,000 cuts. It can feel harder to validate, harder to name, but your experience is valid, even if no one else sees it so. Can a covert narcissist stay hidden forever? They can stay hidden as long as you're willing to keep doubting your own eyes, your own heart, your own truth. But once you start noticing the patterns, once you start gathering the evidence inside yourself, the hiding is over. For you. And that's what matters most. You may not convince others. You may not get validation from family or friends who only see the charming, self-effacing side. But you don't need everyone to see it. You only need to see it for yourself. Awareness is the beginning of liberation. What happens then is not about changing them. It's about changing how you show up in the relationship. It might mean stepping back emotionally, setting firmer boundaries, or in some cases, walking away. None of that is easy, but clarity makes it possible. So no, the covert narcissist cannot stay hidden forever, because the truth has a way of surfacing. And when you trust yourself enough to see it, their camouflage loses its power. What was once invisible becomes undeniable. And in that moment, you reclaim the freedom that was always yours to begin with. Covert narcissism is often misunderstood because it doesn't wear the same mask as the more obvious, grandiose kind of narcissism. When we think of narcissism, we imagine someone loud, arrogant, domineering, constantly boasting about themselves, cutting people off, and making their entitlement known in every room they walk into. That's easy to spot, and in some ways, easier to deal with because it is so overt. But covert narcissism operates differently. It is subtle, quiet, and often invisible at first. It hides not in grandiosity, but in insecurity, in envy, in a kind of chronic self-pity that pulls people in. Instead of saying, "I'm the smartest one here," a covert narcissist may sigh heavily and say, "No one ever listens to me," and that becomes their hook. The covert narcissist thrives on flying under the radar. They may appear shy, reserved, or even humble. They might not walk into the room and demand attention, but they will still expect it, silently, and become resentful when they don't get it. Their narcissism shows up not in shouting, but in subtle digs, sulking, guilt-tripping, and long silences that communicate disdain without words. It is in the rolled eyes, the sarcastic remarks, the quiet withdrawal when someone else is getting attention. It doesn't look like arrogance. It looks like bitterness. And that makes it harder to name. People around a covert narcissist often struggle because their behavior doesn't fit the stereotypical mold. You might find yourself second-guessing, are they just insecure? Are they depressed? Are they sensitive? That's the trap. The covert narcissist will often present as the misunderstood victim. They will tell stories that highlight how others have wronged them, how the world has overlooked them, how they give so much but get so little in return. And for empathetic people, this is almost irresistible. You feel pulled to help, but to comfort, to reassure them. But that is exactly how the cycle keeps going. The covert narcissist may not brag about their successes, but they may downplay others' achievements in quiet ways. You share good news, and instead of joy, you get a lukewarm, "That's nice," or a reminder of how they never get breaks like that. You might notice how conversations keep turning back to them, not with flashy boasting, but with complaints, sighs, or subtle comparisons that put them at the center. This constant undercurrent of envy, resentment, and victimhood is their way of asserting superiority, though it may not look like superiority in the traditional sense. What makes covert narcissism so destabilizing is its invisibility. When someone screams at you or openly insults you, you can point to that and say, "That was wrong." When someone quietly withdraws affection, gives you backhanded compliments, or makes you feel guilty for being happy, it's much harder to identify. You start to wonder if you're imagining things, and that self-doubt is the covert narcissist's strongest weapon. Their narcissism hides in plausible deniability. They can always say, "I didn't mean it like that," or "You're reading too much into it." And because their tactics are so subtle, you may even believe them. Covert narcissism also hides in the way they manage their public persona. To the outside world, they may look generous, thoughtful, even selfless. They might be the person who shows up for others when it's convenient, or presents as the long-suffering spouse, the overlooked worker, the misunderstood friend. People may say, "They're so nice, so sensitive," and that external validation can keep you stuck. Because if everyone else sees them as kind or gentle, you start to wonder if the problem is you. But the truth is, covert narcissism is every bit as corrosive as the grandiose kind. The difference is in how it shows up. It hides not in arrogance, but in victimhood. It hides not in shouting, but in silence. It hides not in overt entitlement, but in chronic dissatisfaction that slowly drains the people around them. The covert narcissist may never demand to be put on a pedestal, but they will quietly punish you if you don't treat them as special. Recognizing these patterns takes time because they don't always announce themselves. You notice them in the aftermath. The way you feel guilty for being happy, the way you shrink yourself to avoid their envy, the way you constantly explain and justify yourself. The covert narcissist doesn't stand up and declare, "Look at me." Instead, they sit back and wait for you to notice them, to caretake them, to fill the endless void of their unmet needs. And when you don't, you feel the sting of their resentment, even if it comes in the smallest, quietest ways. That is how covert narcissism hides, beneath layers of subtlety, wrapped in just enough vulnerability to confuse and hook you. It doesn't look like the narcissism you expect, but it functions in the same way to center themselves, to exploit empathy, and to keep others off balance. When we talk about whether a covert narcissist can stay hidden, the most important truth is that their behavior, over time, always leaves a trail. They may be subtle, they may be quiet, they may wear a mask of humility or sensitivity, but human behavior cannot stay completely invisible forever. It always leaks out. Patterns accumulate, and the people closest to them begin to feel the consequences. The covert narcissist's ability to stay hidden depends less on their skill at disguising themselves and more on how long the people around them are willing to ignore or explain away what they are experiencing. At first, the covert narcissist tactics don't always raise alarms. A sarcastic comment here, a moody silence there, a bit of envy when someone else is doing well. It all feels small, forgivable, easy to overlook. But when those little moments repeat themselves over weeks, months, or years, the impact is undeniable. You start to notice how you feel after spending time with them. You may leave conversations drained, confused, or doubting yourself. You might notice that you shrink a little when you talk about your achievements, or you find yourself bracing for their reaction anytime you share good news. This is the slow, creeping impact of covert narcissism, and it is how the mask eventually slips. The covert narcissist cannot stay hidden because the toll shows up in the people around them. It shows up in your nervous system, in the fatigue you feel when every interaction becomes a dance around their moods. It shows up in the constant self-questioning. Am I too sensitive? Did I say the wrong thing? Why do I always feel guilty when I didn't actually do anything wrong? Even when the covert narcissist keeps their external image intact, the invisible damage is still happening behind closed doors. Over time, the weight of that damage becomes impossible to ignore. You may not see the covert narcissist screaming or throwing tantrums in public, but you will see them sulking in private when they don't get their way. You may not see them boasting openly, but you will notice their subtle comparisons and quiet envy. You may not see them demanding the spotlight, but you will notice how they pull back or punish you emotionally when they feel overlooked. And while these behaviors are easy to rationalize individually, collectively, they tell a very clear story. That's why the question isn't really whether they can hide forever. It's whether you are ready to connect the dots and trust what you see. Part of what allows covert narcissists to hide for long stretches is the doubt they plant in others. They rely on people dismissing their instincts, brushing off patterns, or excusing behavior as stress, insecurity, or sensitivity. They benefit from your empathy, your desire to give the benefit of the doubt, your tendency to rationalize. They didn't mean it that way. Or they've just had a hard life. But over time, those rationalizations get harder to sustain because the feeling in your body doesn't lie. The tension, the confusion, the sense of being diminished, those are not random feelings. They are data. And once you begin to take them seriously, the covert narcissist's cover is no longer intact. Even if they manage to keep some people fooled for life, they cannot stay hidden from the impact they have. The partner who feels invisible, the child who grows up doubting their worth, the friend who walks away after years of subtle put-downs. Those outcomes are the evidence. You may never get the grand revelation, the dramatic exposure, the clear admission. But the patterns themselves expose them. They reveal themselves through the unhappiness, resentment, and instability they leave in their wake. The idea that someone can hide forever assumes that people don't change, don't notice, don't grow more attuned to their own experiences. But people do. With time, with awareness, with education, many start to recognize that what they've been tolerating isn't normal. And that's when the covert narcissist's ability to stay hidden begins to collapse. They may not change, they may not drop the mask, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And at that point, their hiding is over, at least in your eyes. So while a covert narcissist can certainly fly under the radar for years, the truth is that their behavior cannot stay invisible forever. Human relationships reveal patterns, and those patterns always tell the truth, whether or not the narcissist admits it. Their mask may never come off completely, but the cracks eventually show. And when they do, you are left with a choice to keep pretending you don't see them, or to acknowledge what has been there all along. One of the most powerful truths in relationships with covert narcissists is that your body and your intuition will often recognize what your mind cannot yet fully name. Long before you have the language for it, before you've read the books or heard the term covert narcissism, something inside you already knows that something is off. It's that tightness in your chest after an interaction, the pit in your stomach when you anticipate their reaction, the exhaustion that follows what should have been an ordinary conversation. These sensations are not accidents, they are signals. Your nervous system is a finely tuned alarm system, and when it keeps ringing in the presence of a covert narcissist, that is data you cannot ignore. The covert narcissist's greatest trick is to get you to doubt yourself, because their behaviors are subtle, backhanded comments, guilt trips, silences, quiet envy. They give you plenty of room to rationalize. You tell yourself, they didn't really mean that, or I'm probably reading too much into it. You question whether you're overreacting, and that self-doubt keeps you tethered to them. But while your mind may talk you out of it, your body is not so easily fooled. Your intuition shows up as tension, fatigue, or even dread, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that everything is fine. This is why it's so important to pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. One sarcastic comment may not mean much, but when you consistently feel smaller, more anxious, or less joyful around someone, that is not a coincidence. Your body is keeping score. Your intuition is piecing together what your conscious mind hasn't yet fully acknowledged. And even when the covert narcissist remains calm, polite, or reasonable, you feel the dissonance. You feel the gap between their surface behavior and the undertone of resentment or criticism that lingers beneath it. Listening to your body is often difficult in these relationships because the covert narcissist benefits from your empathy and your tendency to minimize your own experience. You may have learned to put others' needs before your own or to avoid conflict at all costs. That makes it easy to dismiss your inner signals. But every time you push aside the heaviness, the guilt, or the anxiety, you silence the very system that is trying to protect you. Intuition is not always loud. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through fatigue, through the way you dread picking up the phone, through the way you feel relief when they're not around. That quiet knowing is just as valid as anything someone else could confirm for you. The covert narcissist thrives when you invalidate yourself. They don't need to yell or control openly. They only need you to stay trapped in your own second, guessing. If they can keep you thinking, maybe it's me, then they never have to take responsibility. That's why reclaiming trust in your body and your intuition is such an essential step. Once you allow yourself to believe that those signals matter, the covert narcissist loses some of their camouflage. You may not be able to articulate every detail of their behavior yet, but you no longer dismiss the impact it has on you. And that shift changes everything. Over time, as you pay closer attention to what your body tells you, patterns begin to crystallize. You notice that the headache always comes after their criticisms, that your stomach always knots when you anticipate their reaction, that your energy drops after their subtle put-downs. Those physical reactions are evidence. They are reminders that even when the covert narcissist insists they didn't mean it that way, your body has already registered the harm, and the body rarely lies. It takes practice to trust these signals again, especially if you've spent years being told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, or too easily hurt. But sensitivity is not a flaw, it's a guide. It's the very thing that alerts you to unhealthy dynamics. When you start honoring that sensitivity, instead of seeing it as a weakness, you reclaim the clarity that covert narcissists work so hard to obscure. What ultimately becomes clear is that the covert narcissist may be able to hide from others, but they cannot hide from your intuition. They may convince the outside world that they are gentle, selfless, or misunderstood, but your body knows the truth. It knows the difference between safety and danger, between genuine connection and quiet manipulation. And when you learn to trust those signals, instead of silencing them, you begin to step out of their shadow. You start to rebuild trust in yourself, which is exactly what they work so hard to dismantle. In the end, your body and intuition are not just warnings, they are your roadmap out. They are the tools that remind you of your reality when words, appearances, and even your own doubts get in the way. They are proof that even in the fog of covert narcissism, there is always a part of you that still knows the truth. Awareness is the turning point in any relationship with a covert narcissist. For so long, you may have been trapped in confusion, wondering why interactions left you feeling small, guilty, or unseen. You may have doubted your reactions, second, guessed your feelings, and rationalized their behavior because it wasn't loud or obvious. The subtlety of covert narcissism makes it difficult to call out, and that is what keeps people stuck for years, even decades. But once you begin to connect the dots, once you start to see the patterns for what they are, something shifts. The camouflage loses power, and what felt impossible before suddenly becomes clear. That awareness doesn't always come in one dramatic moment. More often, it is a slow awakening. You notice how often you leave conversations with them feeling worse than when you started. You realize that your excitement is consistently met with envy, that your struggles are minimized, or that your boundaries are ignored. You reflect on the countless little moments that didn't sit right, but that you brushed aside, and suddenly, the bigger picture comes into focus. This is not just a difficult personality. This is not just insecurity. This is a pattern of behavior that centers them at your expense over and over again. That realization is the beginning of your freedom. Awareness doesn't mean they change. In fact, in most cases, the covert narcissist remains exactly the same. They continue with the same passive aggression, the same guilt trips, the same subtle put-downs. But the difference is that you see it. And when you see it, you can no longer unknow it. You no longer internalize their comments as truth. You no longer explain away the way you feel. You begin to separate what belongs to them from what belongs to you. That separation is where liberation starts. Once you have awareness, you begin to make different choices. You may still interact with them, but you respond less. You stop over-explaining yourself when they sulk or give you the silent treatment. You stop dimming your light to protect them from their own envy. You set firmer boundaries, and while they may not like it, you stop making their discomfort your responsibility. Awareness allows you to reclaim your agency, and in doing so, you break the cycle of constantly catering to their needs. It's important to remember that awareness is not about exposing them to others. You may be tempted to explain to friends or family what you've realized, hoping they'll validate your experience. But many covert narcissists maintain a very polished public persona. Others may still see them as generous, selfless, or misunderstood. If you don't get validation from the outside, that doesn't make your awareness less real. What matters is that you see it. Liberation doesn't depend on everyone agreeing with you. It depends on you trusting yourself enough to act on what you know. Awareness also shifts the way you hold yourself. Instead of walking on eggshells, you begin to stand more firmly in your truth. Instead of absorbing their resentment or negativity, you recognize it as theirs to carry. Instead of being pulled into endless cycles of guilt and justification, you step back and refuse to play the game. This doesn't always mean walking away immediately. Sometimes circumstances make that complicated. But even an internal shift can change everything. When you stop giving their behavior the benefit of the doubt, you stop being manipulated by it. The freedom that comes with awareness is not about fixing them. It's about reclaiming yourself. For so long, your energy has been consumed by monitoring their moods, trying to manage their reactions, and questioning your own perceptions. Awareness cuts through that fog. You start to feel the weight lift as you realize you don't have to keep participating in the same patterns. You may grieve the time you lost or the relationship you hoped it could have been, but you also begin to reclaim your clarity and your peace. That clarity can feel both painful and empowering. Painful because you can't unsee what you now know. Empowering, because you finally have the chance to protect yourself in ways you never could before. And while the covert narcissist may continue trying to hide behind their mask, the truth is no longer hidden from you. That is the essence of liberation, not waiting for them to reveal themselves, but trusting yourself enough to recognize the reality and act accordingly. With awareness, the covert narcissist's power weakens. They may still attempt to guilt, manipulate, or diminish, but your eyes are open. Their camouflage no longer works. What once controlled you through confusion now becomes predictable, almost transparent. And in that moment, you reclaim not only your clarity, but also the freedom to choose how you engage, how much access they have to you, and how you want to move forward. The truth about covert narcissism is that while it hides in subtlety, it cannot stay hidden forever. Patterns reveal themselves, your body speaks louder than their words, and your awareness ultimately becomes the key to your liberation. They may never openly admit who they are, and the world around them may continue to see the polished image they present. But you are not powerless in that dynamic. The moment you trust yourself enough to name what you see and honor what you feel, their camouflage stops working on you. And that clarity is where your strength lies, not in changing them, but in reclaiming your own truth, your own boundaries, and your own freedom.